Hello and welcome to episode 228 of Page One, the Writer's Podcast. I'm Marco. Regular listeners will be expecting to hear Tarek's voice here as well. He is in the main interview, but I'm recording this intro and outro bit of the podcast myself because we are squeezing in an extra episode this week. This episode will be out on the Wednesday, with our usual episode out on Friday as well, because we have recorded a lot of episodes with authors whose books come out around the same time, so we're trying to squeeze them in as quickly as we can. So this is a bonus episode. If you're joining us for the first time on the podcast, we'd like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing careers, find out how they got into the industry and try and get as many hints and tips from them as possible. And we've got over 227 episodes now of great guests of authors, screenwriters, comic writers, video game writers, journalists, comedians. So please do check out the back catalogue if you haven't already, because there's bound to be some you are interested in listening to. And obviously, if you're listening to this episode, you'll be interested in this week's great guest, who is Jane Johnson, who has had a fascinating career, first as an editor and then as an author. And, we chat to her about both aspects of that career in publishing, hearing about how she managed the Tolkien estate for many years and really, I think, played a part in forming the vision of the Lord of the Rings and the Tolkien stuff that we now see regularly on the bookshelves, as well as founding the Voyager imprint when she moved to Harper Collins as well. And obviously the Voyager imprint is huge. It's one of the biggest science fiction and fantasy imprints that there is. And we chat to her about how that came about. And obviously we also chat to her about her own writing. She tells us about her latest book, The Secrets of the Bees, and also writing across different genres, and why she does that and why she enjoys it, and all aspects of her writing. So it's a really fascinating chat. So we'll get straight into it after a quick advert for our Writer's Notebook. But before we do, as ever, I just wanted to mention that we do have a Patreon, which you can hear episodes early if you join. You get early access to those. You also get bonus episodes. You get video access to the episodes if it's audio only, and lots of other benefits. So please do check that out if you haven't already. But for now, let's get into the podcast. The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realised it's not just a story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page One. Page One is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with Page One.
Did you always want to be a writer?
I started writing stories when I was about 6 or 7. So, yeah, I suppose you can probably say I don't know if it was a conscious wish to be a writer. I just wanted to reshape the world as I saw it, I think. I came back from watching Bambi with my mother.
Okay.
I was so appalled by the story that I wrote a completely different version as soon as I got home. And I think that's what writers do. I think they're reshaping the world when they write to the way that they see it.
Hmm.
We don't get listened to, do we, in real life generally?
Yeah, it's
And
true.
writing books means that you've got a captive audience there trapped in your book, so that you can have your say
Yeah.
in whatever entertaining way you can do it.
Because I was looking at your website and looking at kind of where you started off, etc. And I know you studied English at uni, or English at uni, sorry, and then you got some really interesting degrees. That you went for a teaching degree and then a master's in Old Icelandic language and literature. And that I was like, well, that what was the draw there? That sounded like a very interesting thing to have studied.
I think I was determined to make myself unemployable. I'll tell you what it was that I read Lord of the Rings when I was 11, and it just got into me. I was
Hmm.
so fascinated by this other world. I just felt that somehow it was my world. And I think if you hit a book like that at the right age, that's what it does to you.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And I just never really got out of it again. And so when I went to Goldsmiths and did my English degree, I specialised in Anglo-Saxon, which actually I hated to start with. It was so hard. And then it was weird. It was like magic eye. One day it just fell into place and I could read
Okay.
Anglo-Saxon. It was bizarre. So then I opted also for an Old Icelandic component to the degree at that point, and found the same thing. I actually found it easier than Anglo-Saxon in some ways. But the sagas are so brilliant. They're just the first novels, really, and I just loved them. And it had. I knew that they had formed the basis to a lot of what Tolkien used as his source material for
Hmm.
Middle Earth, and so it just felt like coming home again. But yeah, no, I'd had made myself completely unemployable at that point.
Well, you say that because the Tolkien stuff did come in useful because I think
Mm.
you joined George Allen and Unwin Publishers and you became responsible for the Tolkien work there. I think.
Hmm.
What did that involve on a sort of day-to-day basis then?
Well, what it was supposed to involve when I got the job was mainly typing and filing.
Okay.
But they soon discovered that I was a really, really bad secretary and had no secretarial skills whatsoever. I still
Okay.
can't type, that's why I write longhand. I'm just a terrible typist. I spend more time correcting my typing than I do actually putting it in. And actually, I have found we had carbons at that time. It's that long ago
Hmm.
that you would make copies by putting carbon sheets in between and then really hitting the keys hard. Um, my carbon copies are unreadable because I had to use Tipex sheets for correction. So what's left at the end of that, when you've gone over words several times to correct them, is, I can tell you, completely illegible. So yes, no, that was what I was supposed to be doing, and then they realised that actually I was a terrible, terrible secretary, but I had other skills, and so I was promoted up to look after Tolkien and the incipient fantasy list at the time, Unicorn, which was just getting started. So honestly, just an amazing degree of luck.
Hmm.
And I guess following your heart, because I would never have gone for that interview. It had been any other publisher. I wouldn't even
Hmm.
have dreamt of doing anything like it. But as soon as my neighbour said to me, you should go for the interview, and I said, where is it? And she said, it's Allen and Unwin. I went, oh my God, that's Tolkien's publisher. So it was like
Yeah.
Mecca for me.
And
Brilliant.
and so once you got into that role and involved in that part of the business, what did it involve on a day-to-day basis?
Well, largely, it was a matter of repackaging the books and of doing calendars and cards and various things as spin-offs. So I was involved in quite a lot of commissioning of artists, and we had the centenary coming up as well in 1991. So my big project, and the one that I kept pushing away at for years, actually before then, was to illustrate the Lord of the Rings, but using an English artist rather than all the artwork that we'd had before that had largely been American art, quite brightly coloured, and I felt that none of it was right for the landscapes of Tolkien, which are obviously so waterformed.
Yeah.
And the artist that I particularly loved was Alan Lee, who is based on Dartmoor, and his natural history paintings of the moors and the woodlands. They just said Tolkien to me, and I'd seen his illustrated edition of the Mabinogion, and so I had to push the estate quite hard. It was a hard no to start with. They said absolutely no way do we ever want these books illustrated by anyone other than J.R.R. Tolkien himself, you know, whose artwork, you know, is exquisite, but there really wasn't anything for Lord of the Rings. And I just kept sending them things saying, look at this, it's just beautiful. It would make such a beautiful edition. And eventually we got the go ahead to do it. And that gorgeous illustrated Lord of the Rings for the centenary, it launched so many projects, including, of course, Peter Jackson's trilogy. So going to New Zealand and being involved in the movies there was just extraordinary, because
that's
I was
incredible.
walking into the artwork that I'd commissioned. It was so weird.
That's amazing. Yeah, that must have been just insane.
It was absolutely, literally otherworldly. I got off a plane at Queenstown wearing, you know, London clothes and high heels, and suddenly found myself halfway up a mountain with Gandalf and the Fellowship arriving around the corner.
When you're working with the Tolkien estate, I mean, is it a case of having to kind of, because I mean, are they quite controlling and protective on the property, and are you always having to keep in mind what you think you want to do and what would be quite exciting, and balancing that with what their views are? And is it quite political in a way? Is it quite a tough job to kind of thread that needle, or is it quite kind of both of you guys working as a partnership?
Yeah, it's good. It's a really good question. I haven't worked with them for a long time now, because, of course, my life rather changed somewhat in 2005. But when I was working with them, I will say because they knew that I loved the books. And so we were both coming from the same place to a large extent. I mean, obviously, when you work for any publisher at all, you are also representing their commercial interest, and you're pushing for things that are not always compatible with how the estate sees the world. And they don't exist in the same world that a commercial publisher exists in. So there's obviously always going to be degrees of friction. But I have to say, you know, my first conversation with Christopher Tolkien was me telling him how much I had enjoyed his translation of Havara Saga. So from there on in, things were easier.
And then obviously they were bought by Harper Collins, which led to you founding the Voyager imprint as well, which is, you know, now a very big thing in publishing as well. I mean, how did that come about?
Well, you know, I mean, to go from a small family publisher established in John Ruskin's house on Museum Street to this gigantic corporate offices in which I was one of only, I think, 2 survivors of the entire company. So it wasn't really a merger as such. It was a bit of a bloodbath. And having to then sort of change from a very friendly, rather otherworldly sort of existence in itself in publishing to real hard-nosed commercial publishing, almost entirely run by men at that time.
Right. Okay.
Coming in as quite a young woman with no experience of the commercial the real hard commercial world was quite a challenge. I can tell you. You have to find your feet fast, and you have to be really tough, and that didn't necessarily come easily. But I think I have one thing I always have had is the courage of my convictions, and I absolutely loved science fiction and fantasy. I loved the really good, strong, quality end of it, and I'd brought several good writers over with me from Unwin, and they just tasked me with putting everything that we published under Grafton and Collins and Unwin all together under a single umbrella. And then they had a meeting in which we all sat round and everybody voted for names for the list, and they voted for Icon. And I went away that night and I just cannot. It's just abstract. It doesn't say anything to me. I just hate it. And I came back in the next day and I said, look, that just won't work. And how about Voyager? And I said, look, the Voyager space probe is out there, out in the universe, and it's sending us back information from other worlds. And, when you're reading, you are a voyager of the imagination, you're an armchair traveller. And that was how we actually picked that name in the end. I'm so glad I stuck to my gun.
Far better name than Icon, I have to say.
But what a hell of a list that was. I mean, we had everything from Tolkien at one end and to Asimov at the other, with all stopping places in between, Donaldson and Eddings and Feist, and my writers from Unwin, people like Jeff Ryman and Colin Greenland and Louise Cooper and Megan Lindholm, who then became Robin Hobb. Yep. It was a fantastic mix of writers.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I was just interested. What when you were running the Voyager imprint, what's a day-to-day life like? Is it super varied? Was it more like a kind of managing like a team of people or or a team of writers? Are you kind of overseeing stuff? What was a typical day like for you?
I don't know. Do we have a typical day in publishing?
Yeah, so how about it's an impossible question to answer?
I mean, it changed so much because publishing changed so much. When I launched Voyager in 1995, it was very much editorial centric in a way that the industry no longer is. Okay. I held the reins of power. I held a marketing budget for the list, a dedicated marketing budget, and had the say in how that was deployed. I mean, that's going back
that's
some.
A lot of power, yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of power, but also, when you know exactly what it is you want to achieve and how you want to do it, that's the way to do it. So it made for a really successful launch, and we launched Robin Hobb on the back of that incredible Voyager launch. And my God, what a career she's had!
Yeah,
fantastic. And then the year after that, George R.R. Martin. So, a
pretty good run there. Yeah.
But I spent a lot of time working directly with the authors on their books. It's still the thing that I like to do most is work on the text. As far as I'm concerned, that's my forte, and it's the power that I bring as an editor, is that I think I'm quite a good editor, quite an empathetic editor, but I can be tough when I need to be. And I think that's such a crucial part of the job, actually, is to tell people the things I don't actually want to hear, but is in their own best interests. You've got to be honest as an editor, and that's not always easy. You're treading a line between what the publisher wants and needs and what the author wants and needs, and that can be quite tough as well. But there has to be a happy medium for everyone. Otherwise, you don't get the sort of success that both sides require. And so, of course, there are a lot of meetings as well. So a typical day, you'd have meetings as well. I did have a team that I managed at that point. It was a very diverse and interesting team. I never picked people with typical publishing backgrounds. I always picked on personality.
Right. Okay.
It drove HR mad, because they didn't all have degrees either, because I didn't feel that brought us the sort of creative spark that we needed in the team.
Yeah.
So I wanted a diverse team of people who brought different things to the table, and had different passions. But also, you'd still need people who are happy to do the filing, and as we did then, and bag things up and send them out, and all the tedious stuff that makes up so much of your job as a publisher. But also, I just wanted people who had really bright ideas as well. And I really think, it was such a lively time, the mid-90s and the early 2000s for publishing. Everything seemed to be possible at that point, and it really laid down strong foundations, I think, as well.
What do you think has changed then in terms of publishing and into the modern day now?
We're a lot more driven by data now than we ever used to be. And that can be really useful in some ways, in that, you have to make money as a publisher. It's absolutely crucial. If you don't make money, you go under. So fully understand that we have to understand the metrics and how things work, and see where the market's going, see what's working, what isn't, what formats work, what people want. That's all fantastic. But if you let data be king, you lose the artistic end of things. Mm-hmm. And I've always published for the future. I've always published books that I think will stand the test of time. Mm-hmm. I don't follow trends. I mean, good modern editors have to follow trends. I don't have to do that, thank goodness. It's not my forte. Mm-hmm. I can't publish a book I don't love. Mm-hmm. If I love a book, it'll get well published. If I don't love a book, it won't get well published. There are fantastic editors around who can do that job without loving the books, but I've never been one of them. And so I'm just very lucky now to work with my stable of authors that I just shepherd through the process. I work closely with. I love their work, and just want to make it work for us and for them.
Do you think publishing has become more risk averse in a way in this, in the pursuit of trends and pursuit of, trying to follow the big things in the market?
Yes, I think it has, to a certain extent. But, we used to have this meeting 1 year after publication for all our key books, whereby we would look at all the metrics, all the profit and loss accounts that we had put together when we acquired the book, our vision for it, what we thought it would sell, where we thought it would sell, how many in each format. And then a year on from publication, we would then place, the reality slide over that one and see whether it tallied, and it never did.
As in it never did as well as you'd hoped?
No, so it's never tallied, ever.
Okay.
It either did nothing like the pattern that we had envisaged for it, or it outperformed massively in one particular area, or it failed.
So does that just show that?
Never knew, and that's the thing, is that I think modern publishing has kidded itself into thinking that by filling itself with figures and predictions, you can control what you're publishing and how it works. And, the thing I can tell anybody as a publisher of 40 years experience is that you have no control whatsoever as to what works and what doesn't. You cannot make a book work when you hype it if it's not the right book at the right time.
Yeah, so, I find that stuff fascinating, because there's certainly been books, in the last 5 years, off the top of my head, that I know have had massive pushes behind them. Huge amounts of money spent. You see the adverts for them everywhere. You can't escape them, and yet they've not sold. And I've always kind of been like, how I would have thought there comes a certain point where you spend that much money on it and it's that much exposure, it can't not sell. It's just everywhere. But obviously that doesn't translate at all.
It has to
to
sell
certainty.
A lot more, I suppose.
Yeah. I guess it does. That's true. Yeah.
What it does is sell it in. It sells it, so you'll get big piles of that book in bookshops. Mm-hmm. But word of mouth is what sells it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if you haven't got the right book and the right buzz around that book, nothing you can do will make it work. Sometimes it's just sheer bad luck, though. There's an awful lot of luck involved in publishing.
Yeah,
It was
yeah,
the
for
thing
sure.
that, when I was taken on at Allen and Unwin, I got the job because I was working at Ladbrokes at the time as a board marker and cashier. And my boss said to me, I'm giving you this job because it's clear that you don't mind getting your hands dirty, but also publishing is a gambling industry and you understand that better than anybody. And it's true, it is a gambling industry, and there's only so much of it that you can actually control as a publisher, unless you control the outlet. If publishers had, as we had a chance to way back when, actually have our own bookshops, great big chains of bookshops, then you can control to a certain extent, the whole process of getting it into the hands of the readership. But you can't control readers. You can't control how they feel about things. You can't control the world into which those books are being published and whether they hit the wrong note at the wrong time. So, there are so many factors that we just don't have any control over at all.
Yeah.
And that's why I always go with my gut when I was buying books. I only ever bought the books that I really loved and I felt would stand the test of time.
Yeah.
It's funny because we often say with our guests on the podcast, that writing is luck based. There, it requires the right timing, the right person to look at it on the right day, that they pick it up and they don't just brush past it in the big pile of stuff that they've got, essentially. But I suppose I've never really thought that continues quite as much throughout the whole process, even to the publishing level.
Yeah, I think it's life, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose
There are
that's
so
true.
many
Yeah.
coefficients every day that change, in all our lives, all the time. So why should it be any different for publishing? Just because we think we can control it, it's just an illusion.
What was the bookshop opportunity that you mentioned there, that in terms of controlling the sales of the book to the public? Was that a potential avenue that you guys were looking at one point, was buying up a chain of bookstores?
Yes, it was. That was back in the late 90s when I remember, there was a possibility when the net book agreement fell. Some of us said, but look, if this happens and we can't control the price anymore, and the supermarkets and the wholesalers become the key players in this, we've lost all our power. We're just also, you're taking returns as well and refunding. It's a mad business model. It makes no sense at all. So there were discussions back then about publishers acquiring bookshops.
All right. Okay. Interesting.
And it would have been interesting. I've no idea how it would have gone. It might have been a complete disaster. But
I guess it would have been kind of like an Amazon type situation, right, where you're kind of publishing books and selling books, and you're kind of control the chain all the way through.
Yeah, that would have been interesting.
Yeah, no, definitely.
But as publishers, Harper Collins has this massive distribution setup whereby other publishers actually give us their books to distribute. So it was all possible at that stage. If we'd taken that chance, I think at that point it could have been a very different industry now.
Do you wish you had taken that chance?
I just think we gave away a lot of our power as a creative industry at that point.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think it was for short-term gains. I think everybody in the sales team saw big zeros attached to huge sales across massive outlets, and I can understand why they would, but at the time it then narrowed the scope of the sort of books that we were publishing, because if you couldn't get into a supermarket, nobody was interested.
Yeah. Okay. That's very interesting.
So if we move from your publishing side
pivot
to your writing, I mean, you said at the start that you came home after that Bambi and wrote that story, and were you writing all of the time? When did you start to focus on your own writing more seriously?
I was writing through my 20s. Just putting stuff away. And when I started in publishing, I was just so overawed by other people's talent. I thought, oh my God, put it away. Don't even think about it. And I did actually put it away for about 10 years and think there's no way I'm ever going to be able to do this. And I reached a sort of tipping point in my late 30s, I think, when I suddenly felt that I had come to terms with how the mechanics of a book worked. When I was taking somebody's book apart and thinking, if we do this, we do that, we put a subplot in here and move this part of the book out to this end of the book, the story. And it just suddenly occurred to me that I actually understood much more than I ever had done about how storytelling worked and how you structure stories. And at that point, I started writing again, which was a really interesting thing. I thought, if I can do it for other people, I should be able to do it for myself. It's much harder doing it for yourself, I can tell you.
It's funny because I suppose when I had in my head, I was thinking of it. You've got all this experience working on the kind of other side of the curtain, and I was like, that must be a great sense of kind of knowing how the industry works, kind of have an idea of market, etc. But I hadn't thought about it from the point of view of you're exposed to so much amazing writing from trying to start off, being almost seeing that as an imposing thing and an off-putting thing, which I hadn't thought about. So that's quite an interesting point of view.
I mean, knowing about the industry can be pretty off-putting as well.
Yeah, that's true.
Knowing the pitfalls and the difficulties, and as you say, the luck. How people get acquired by editors in the first place. It's a miracle that anybody ever gets published. Really,
yeah.
You require so many stars to align, and as an editor, I fully understand. That you've got to you have to trust your luck. That's all you can do. All you can do. The only part of the process that you control is what you write, and how you write it. And we've all been through tough times in when writing and not being published or being published not well. And the only thing you can do is just keep writing the best books that you can possibly write.
Yeah.
And so you sort of had that moment of understanding and decided to try writing again. And since then, obviously, you've written lots and lots of books across lots and lots of genres as well. Before we dive into that, I want to ask you about your latest book, which is The Secrets of the Bees, which is out today, I think, as we record this episode.
Very exciting.
Very much.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about that book?
Here it is.
Excellent.
Oh, nice.
I'm Cornish. I'm born and raised in Cornwall, and have seen Cornwall change so very much over the decades that I just wanted suddenly to write a State of the Nation novel for Cornwall. I mean, I didn't start out with that sort of grandiose vision of it. My starting point was that I had heard stories of people being evicted from their cottages, their long lets, by landlords who wanted to Airbnb them, for huge tourist gain, money from tourists. And I knew from various people's experience, I'd seen this happen to, how impossible it was for them to find anywhere to live. There was just nowhere affordable in Cornwall on a long let, because everybody just saw pound signs attached to the tourist industry and were not letting to local people. And so we found, certainly where I live on the coast in West Penwith, the communities get hollowed out. They get emptied out of locals who cannot afford to live there anymore because there are no lets, and any property that goes on the market just goes for such a ridiculous sum of money, especially if you're a growing family and you need a garden or or a garage, God forbid, anywhere to park. And where I live, I have to park a mile away from my house. You add zeros onto the value of any property down here. Nobody can afford those houses.
Yeah.
And we were getting people coming down from London, and buying them for cash on a bonus. you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and for
Just another world.
yeah, total other world. And
Yeah.
so I wanted to write about how those two worlds butt up together, and how we manage that, because there has to be a balance to be found between old Cornwall, as I see it, you know, the indigenous people of Cornwall and their rootedness in the county, the nature of the county, the history, the heritage, all that, you know, needs to be protected. But we also need to have the innovation and the money and the new people, the new blood coming
Yeah.
into the county at the same time. But we're not in balance in any sort of way at the moment. So I did not want to preach. I wanted to write an entertaining story about taking that as my premise, as a sort of state of the nation novel. And so I picked my protagonist to be Ezra, who is about 80 years old. He's always lived in his tiny cottage. He was born and raised there. His father and grandfather before him as well. They worked as estate managers for the local estate, and the cottage borders the estate. But when the owner dies, she dies intestate, and she's extremely old and predates all the title deed changes that came into force. Cornwall has an immense number of properties that are not on the land registry, more than anywhere else, because I think of the Duchy of Cornwall connections. Anyway, so I thought, what an interesting situation this would be, to sort of have this complete legal grey area around this property. So when the new owners come down from London with their pots of money and buy the estate, and they see this nice little cottage, a bit ramshackle, falling down rather, on the edge of their land, they think, oh, there's an opportunity. We can do it up and we can rent it out to tourists for vast sums of money. You know, barbecue there, you know, jacuzzi there, all that sort of thing. And so they try to persuade Ezra that he might quite like to go and move into an old people's home, or, you know, sheltered accommodation in Penzance or something like that. And he's not having any of it. And my premise is always, I've written a couple of novels with old people at the heart of them, because I do think it's very easy to take old people at face value and not realize what a huge hinterland they may have.
Yeah.
And Ezra's hinterland is quite interesting. You know, he's had active service, and that's going to come into play as the war escalates between him and the incomers. So I had quite a lot of fun with this book. It was very amusing in places to write, and very dark in some other places. And I really hope I've got the balance right. And, you know, there has to be a solution reached at the end. And it was fun writing about the history and the secrets and the power of Cornwall itself to actually disrupt. It can disrupt, you know, this is a place that doesn't conform to anything really. So it's always a good setting.
It's interesting because I've got family in Venice, and it's a very similar sort of thing. You know, it just becomes, you know, effectively like a large Disneyland for large parts of the year. And they're trying to find a solution to that as well. How do you get Venetians to still live in Venice? That's the problem.
You don't want a tourist park. You don't. I mean, you know,
exactly.
People wander around our almost empty village now. You know, I had somebody stand outside my door when I was on the other side of the village, and it had a really small fisherman's cottage, and they just stood there and went, "Gosh, people used to live in these places." I'm still here.
And so I said earlier that you'd written, obviously, a vast number of books across different genres as well, I think, as well. So I just wondered, you know, when you sit down to write, are you genre agnostic? You don't want to focus on one specific area or type of story, I guess. It's just the story that comes to you that you want to tell.
Yeah, you see, for me as an editor, it's always an author's voice that matters. And that's what knits their body of work together. It's, you know, when you read a book, you're on a journey with somebody, and it's like being trapped in a car with them. and your passenger better be entertaining, otherwise you're going to boot them out. So I think it's all about the author's voice. And so although my books are very different and have different settings and ostensibly appear to be very different on the outside, actually my concerns and the voice and the themes and the way I set about the themes, that's all of a piece. I think with everything I write will always have a bit of humor, it will always have a bit of darkness, it will always have a lot of history, a few secrets, touch of the supernatural sometimes, and it will always have a big old secret stuffed up its sleeve at the end to to shock you with. And I really enjoy writing a revelatory ending, and knowing that I am working my way up to that. So thrillers, mysteries, historicals, comic novels, they all have everything, all those elements in
It's interesting to hear that, because we often hear from authors that they feel almost that they're pigeonholed by their publishers, and their publishers want the next. If it's a crime book, they want the next one in the series, or a crime book in the same vein, sort of a thing. And in fact, often they are discouraged from branching out and telling different types of stories. Whereas I actually agree with you that you can tell an author that has written, it's the voice and the type of story that they're telling, and that can be in any type of genre. But it seems the industry as a whole is quite resistant to that.
I think that's true, but I think that's because the industry is a bit illiterate.
Right. Okay.
Actually, people don't read as much as they ought to within the industry, and they don't read as widely as they ought to. And, if you are trying to hit supermarket slots, then yes, there is a great deal of pressure on you to just churn out the same book again and again and again and again and again.
Yeah.
But I don't write for that purpose. And that's probably why most people will never have heard of me, because nobody's ever been able to do that with my work. You can't package it in the same way over and over, because they're all such different. But I don't write for a market. I don't write for a particular reader. I write for people who want to be challenged and really enjoy an interesting story that they don't know where it's going. And that's not necessarily a very popular thing, because for sales and marketing teams, that's a nightmare. So, kudos to my publisher who stuck with me through this, because, it means that they have to reinvent the wheel every time. And that's a lot of work, actually. And I try and do as much as I can to help with that. At least, I understand the marks they have to hit. But I could never sit down and write book after book after book after book in the same world. I would bore myself to tears and give up and just go gardening instead.
Do you struggle to? Do you struggle to kind of get in the right headspace if you're moving around different books? But then it sounds like also the fact that there is a similarity in tone or in texture that kind of runs throughout your work. Does that help to kind of ground you, to give you a bit of a through line?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, I don't really think about it. Just if I can find an idea that fires me up, and it usually takes one sort of point of inspiration that just makes me fascinated in a subject.
Yeah.
That will drive me, and that will drive the story as well. Because if I'm fascinated and I communicate it well enough to the authors, that should pull them through the book. It's just who can explain writing?
I know. It's a nebulous thing, isn't it? Trying to articulate it sometimes. And is that the case even when, because obviously you've written kids' books and adults' books? Is your approach different when you're writing for a different age, or is it pretty much, do you not think of your kids' books in terms of kids' books? Are they still quite
I don't really. No, I don't.
Yeah.
I don't make many concessions.
Yeah.
They're quite challenging, my children's books. I haven't done one for a while because I lost my editor. She gave up publishing, and I just, I sort of wrote for her in a way. But I don't tend to make concessions. Sometimes the children's books are funnier. But my reviews are, I learned so many new words.
Nice. I do think that that's a good approach, though. Not treating kids as immature, super young. And just
I remember, when I was younger, you would read. I don't know if publishing has divided it up more nowadays than it used to.
I know what you mean. Books that felt more adult, right?
Yeah,
it felt like
definitely.
Didn't feel like kiddie books, or something.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Well, I'm sure we all read things we were not supposed to read when we were far too young.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I read
Dean Koontz, I remember. Yeah.
Oh, well,
Dean
I
Koontz book when I was
published
too young.
Dean for years and years and years. Yeah, big. Yes, that was.
I think it's important, isn't it? It's important to read a bit outside your
I think so. Yeah.
area.
Oh,
and your
absolutely.
zone.
It's how you learn about the adult world as well.
Yeah, no, it's true. And when you sit down to write, do you have a sort of set process? Do you like to outline or plan your novels beforehand, or do you just have the idea and just explore it? Because you said you handwrite, you don't use a computer. So is that? I imagine that's a more deliberate process when you're writing than it would be if you're typing and more able to delete things more quickly, perhaps. Go back to the bit about how it's difficult to talk about writing.
Well, it's just that I'm George R.R. Martin always says, there's architects and there's gardeners. Well, I am literally a gardener, and I write on my allotment most of the time.
Right. Okay.
I think I've spent so long indoors that I hate being indoors. If I can get outside, I will go outside. And you can't see a laptop screen. And anyway, as I explained, I'm just terrible typist. So, I mean, typing would just get in the way of creativity for me because all I would see was misspelt words. And for some reason, I've just developed this method that works for me, whereby I will think about what I'm going to write that day, where the story's going, how the character's feeling, what new elements need to be brought into it. I might jot a few notes down before I go out, take with me any research material I need to dip into for the verisimilitude of the scene. And then I just head out and sit and write. And my allotment is just above the sea, so I can hear the waves coming in and I can hear bird song, and that's about it, really. So I've got a very weak internet signal up there, so that's very good. I don't have any distraction, but I've probably got just enough that if I absolutely need to go and look something up, I can go and find a spot where I can check on it there and not get stymied. But I just find it works for me. It flows much better, and then I can edit as I type it up. And so that's very handy. So that's what I do, is that I will write it in longhand, and then go back later that evening or the next day and input it into the work.
I see. So you don't write the entire book longhand and then you kind of type up as you go. So you're kind of I'm kind of editing.
I'm constantly editing all the time. And of course, then it will get a good old winnowing at the end of it. I'm quite a ruthless self-editor as well when I get to the end of a book. But I find that keeps me in the story, which is quite hard because 4 days a week I'm still publishing other people, and 4 days always leaks into 5 or 6, and quite late.
I can imagine.
Well, so it can be quite hard to carve out a dedicated writing time where I don't have to get everything out of my head and get back into my book again. Can be quite challenging.
When you get to that part of the end where you're editing, you've written it and you're going back and you're doing your ruthless editing of it. Is that very much do you find it a very similar process when you're editing other people's work, when you're doing your own work, or do you find you're so close to your own work it's harder?
Yeah, I think I am able to step back quite well, in that I always know when something's not working. And the beauty of being an editor is you don't panic at that stage and just go, oh my God, the whole thing's fallen apart. You just go, okay, this needs this, this, and this. I haven't got those components here at the moment. I will have to think about that and put them back in, but it's not a disaster because I know how that would work. And then I'll have to tweak this and pull that and add this bit here and go back through, weave this little bit back right through to the start. And so I wouldn't say it's a calm process, but it's not a frantic, panicky process. And I don't think I've ever hated a book when I've got to the end of it, which I know a lot of people do because they've wrestled with it. Because I'm wrestling with it constantly. I'm not a fast writer, and I'm not a fluent writer. I don't fill page after page after page in my notebook. If I on a good day, I'll do 1,500 to 2,000 words, and that's a really good day. But if I only do 500 and they're the right ones, that's absolutely fine. And I don't put myself under pressure like that. I mean, obviously we all have deadlines and all the rest of it, but and I always do try to meet them. But I try not to put myself under too much pressure, because I know that I can fix it,
Yeah.
And how do you find working with other editors, and how do other editors find working with you? Because obviously you've got such experience as an editor. I imagine that it must be, from their point of view as well, slightly.
You know all their tricks.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't try and pull a fast one on me. I know exactly.
No, don't just give me the soft soap and then go in.
Yeah, exactly.
We know that one. It must be quite overfacing sometimes, I think, for a young editor coming in to deal with me. It could be quite worrying for them because they'll think, oh my God, she's got so much experience and she deals with all these big authors. But I try very hard not to be like that. I don't want to be a difficult author in any sort of way. I know what difficult authors are like, and I know how we feel about them in publishing. And
some stories there, I'm sure.
Yeah, lots of stories there. That's simply not me. So I understand everything that they're going through, and I know how much time pressure they're under as well, and how difficult it is to work in modern publishing. So I try to be a very helpful, good author. I always hit my mark. I never make demands. I will say I don't think that was quite what I meant when they, if we have a differing opinion on things. I take the editing. I will go into a small cupboard and scream for 10 minutes when I get it. I think all of us will. They just haven't understood me. Oh my God, this is ridiculous. But the thing is that you never reply immediately when you get that editorial letter. You go away and you think, okay, there's something I have done here that has not worked for them. What have I done that has not worked? And have I just kept too many secrets up my sleeve here? Have I just not made it clear what I meant? Have I told them too much? So, you've got to honour any reader's experience, and an editor is a reader first and foremost. Yeah. And so if there are elements that don't work for them, there'll be reasons for that. And it's such a subjective process that you have to best bear in mind that it is a subjective process and nobody's right in these circumstances.
Yes.
And it is a matter of reaching a medium that works for everybody.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really interesting way of putting it. And we've chatted to folk in the past. We chatted to someone recently actually who said something similar, which was, if you're getting these notes back from editors, then they're not just giving you notes because they hate the book or because they hate you. It's what they've read has elicited some kind of response in them, whether it's confusion or don't think it's working, or and that is, as you say, an honest response to the text, and working out the correct solution to that, I guess, is maybe the tricky part. But it's you can't just brush someone's response to the book under the carpet because you don't like the fact they had that response.
Yes, exactly. That's absolutely right. I mean, everybody's reading is a misreading, isn't that the quote?
Yeah.
Bloom. And it is. Everybody's book is different to everybody else's version of your book. Every reader brings a different experience to it. But, you're there to try and make it as accessible and enjoyable to every single reader. And that has, you're there as a communicator, as a writer, that's your job. You're communicating story to people. So you need to be able to communicate that story as clearly as possible. And editors are really good at pointing out to you where you think you've made it clear, but you haven't, or you've gone off track. And you know, I mean, you get so close to your work by the end of, you know, however long it's taken you to write it, that you really can't see exactly where things haven't quite worked. So,
Yeah.
I mean, the beauty is that I do know how to fix things, and I quite enjoy the rewriting process. You know, I rail against it to start with in my head. It's like, no, it's all perfect. I don't want to change anything. But I don't think I've ever made a book worse by working more on it.
Yes, that's a very good way of putting it.
Yeah. So Secrets of the Bees is out today as we record this episode. Do you, I don't know how far in advance you work. Are you working on something else now already?
Yes, I
Yeah.
am. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, you know, when did I deliver this one? It must have been a year a bit ago.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I never plunge straight into the next one. I always like to have a think for a while as to what I'm going to do. And so, yeah, I've got the next two sort of in my head. The second one is very nebulous indeed, but yeah, and I've got about 100 pages of the other one written,
Nice.
and yeah, I think it'll work. It's quite fun. Bit of publishing industry in it as well.
Fantastic.
What was the last book that you read that you can tell us about?
I am finishing up. I've been reworking my way through the Aubrey and Maturin books by Patrick O'Brien. I haven't read them for ages and ages, and I can't remember what set me off on them again, but I just thought I just really want to go back into that. I have no interest in naval history whatsoever, I should say now. It's not about the naval history. It's about the characters, and there's something about the way that he set up those two characters that I just find completely delightful. He makes me laugh out loud, and I don't think people say that very much about Patrick O'Brien. They go on and on about the amazing naval terminology and his knowledge of 18th century sailing ships. In fact, I don't think he did know that much about these things. Incredibly good at giving you the impression that he did. And I just think he's a very, very clever writer in the way that he approaches different subjects under the umbrella of that bromance between those two characters. So yeah, no, I'm about 16 books in.
Because there's about 20 odd, isn't there? So in that,
yeah,
in
no, I
Master,
know.
Master Commander series.
I'm seeing the end sort of looming at me, which is they've been great companions. I think when you read books in series, it's like companions on the road.
I was always surprised the film didn't do as well as it.
It was a good film as well. I really
enjoyed it. Yeah.
I thought it was great. It was one of his better films, I think.
Yeah. What about the last film that you've watched? Speaking of films.
Oh God, what's the last film I watched? I haven't been into a cinema to watch a film for ages and ages and ages. I just don't get much time, and also, I'm not close to a cinema here, so. I mean,
a film you watched at home. That's easy.
Yeah, no, I'm just trying to think. God, it's awful. I have terrible memory. I tell you what I have been doing is rewatching The Handmaid's Tale.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
It's all
it's quite grim, isn't it?
Now, isn't it?
I
read that book when it first came out, obviously, as being, absolute cornerstone of modern science fiction. And now,
exactly.
The number of true notes she struck, I mean, just extraordinary, incredible.
Yeah.
And it's a really good series as well.
We watched the first season and I really enjoyed it, but it was so grim, and I was like, I never was able to get back in the headspace to continue watching. Every time I sat down, I was like, I'm not sure if I can watch another hour of it. But it's very, very well done, very well made, excellent,
really,
and as you say, very timely.
Yeah.
Well, the very last thing we always do is a super quick fire either or, and there's no right answer to any of these really. But let's start off with writing books or editing books.
Oh, writing books.
Sci-fi or fantasy?
Fantasy.
Night owl or early bird?
Night owl.
TV or cinema?
TV.
Music or no music when you're writing?
Ooh, that varies a lot, actually. Depends what I'm writing. Most of the time, no music because I'm up on the allotment.
Oh, of course, fair enough.
But if I'm in a contemplative state, anything with no words.
Right. Okay. I'm stealing. Tarek normally asks this last one, but e-book or audiobook?
Audiobook.
Audiobook. Excellent.
Nobody
Okay.
ever picks ebook.
I mean, I live on screen. I just, my poor eyes will not take it.
Yeah. And audiobooks, I think there's been a sort of
Oh, I love
renaissance of audiobooks now.
Love it. At the start of COVID, I couldn't read at all. There's just too much stuff going on in my head. And I found the only way back into fiction for me was through audio. And so that's actually stayed with me it's really comforting having somebody read to you. It's really nice.
Isn't it? I know. And as you say, Marco, I think the last few years have come on massive in terms of like production values, multiple readers, sound effects. It's a real radio drama at times. It's
just
wonderful.
fantastic. And a good narrator can make or break.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. I've definitely listened to books that I know are good but ruined by someone who's just the wrong voice for whatever reason, for me anyway, and vice versa. Books that have been elevated by just a wonderful reader.
Yeah, I've been really lucky at my audio readers. They've been fantastic. We've actually had awards for them.
Yeah,
really nice. Yeah,
there's certain genres that I think work. Like for fantasy books, I always think it should be a British narrator.
Absolutely.
Doesn't matter the nationality of the author, but somehow it grounds it more.
They generally sort of exist in a sort of quasi medieval England. So
that's right.
Well, for us, it feels like neutral, doesn't it?
yeah, exactly. Well, thanks very much to Jane for coming on to the podcast. As I said at the start, I really found that a fascinating chat. It was really interesting hearing about her work on the editorial side of things, and also, as a writer, how she, that's taught her to self-edit and helps her to understand the structure of storytelling. And I can only imagine, though, as we were discussing, that it must be slightly intimidating for younger editors who end up editing Jane's own books. But thanks very much to Jane for coming on to the podcast. Secrets of the Bees is out now, so we'll put a link in the podcast description so you can pick that up if it sounds of interest to you. The next episode that we're releasing will be, as I say, very shortly after this one. It'll be released on Friday, apart from for our Patreon backers who will have early access to it, of course, as well. And as I mentioned at the start, if you want to check out our Patreon, just check out the link in the podcast description and you'll see all of the great benefits that there are there. I'm not going to say who the next guest is because, as I say, we've got a lot of authors that we've interviewed recently and I just need to work out the best order to put them out in. So it will be a surprise to me as it is a surprise to you. If you enjoyed today's episode, please do take the time to rate and review us on your favourite podcast app, as that helps us to continue to get great guests on the podcast. And if you want to get in touch with us, we love to hear from our listeners. You can get in touch on most social media, just looking for @UKPage1 on your social media of choice. Otherwise, you can drop us an email at podcast@rightgear.co.uk. But otherwise, have a great couple of days, I guess it will be, and we will speak to you next episode. Well, we hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, be sure to hit that thumbs up button and hit the subscribe button so you never miss an episode like these ones down here.
And if you want to get in touch, you can do so by finding us on our social media platforms up here or drop us a comment way down below there.
But otherwise, thanks for listening and join us for the next episode.
See you later.